Ego is a bit of a pain to acquire. You have to bring yourself to the brink of insanity and then vehemently oppose the intrusive thoughts, or squeeze out the psyche of an immortal representation of some concept into the approximate shape of a usable doodad for you to smack people with. Oh yeah, it can also be difficult to get in game too. That might sound contradictory to the old heads who've had 5 seasons to amass a horde of Battle Pass ego, but to the Greenhorn started with Season 5, and especially to those who have no interest in funding an anime, I may or may not fall into both categories. I'm trying to keep some semblance of credibility. Yeah, ego can be pretty scarce, but never fear, no matter how many egos pulled or passed, all managers have at the very minimum 12. 1 Zen ego for each of the sinners. For simplicity's sake, I'll just call them base ego, you know, like the title. Like it or not, these egos have probably been equipped at some point. For most, you literally have no choice but to use them. Surface level comparisons include the aforementioned fact that they're all Zane, having this red and white stripes motif, barbed wire in the foreground, if you aren't missed, not a homunculus, and most interesting, lacking a corrosion. This means that having a base ego and no others equipped is the only way to have a unit panic instead of corroding, which is cool, I guess. The age scholars of Limbus may also know that base egos weren't always as they were today. On the contrary, actually, they underwent some pretty acute revisions, sometimes the total reworking of its... I wrote people asses... of its passives and / or coin effects. While details will come in due time, old base egos cost the same amount of sanity as Farmwatch has IDs, in other words, none. The only cost was paying the ego resources and voila, the big ol' roll. This made them, as you can imagine, pretty damn good. These original base ego were around for roughly 5-ish months, I think, from February 27th, 2023 to July 20th of the same year. I was not around then, so I cannot attest to how differently this played from today's Limbus, but judging by secondary sources, I am thankful. Okay, is that enough preamble? I'll assume all present already know how these ego work. If not, it'll be on screen. Pardon me, alt-tabers. This ego is so sick. I hate how well this design works. No clue how Yi-Sane manages to rock the suspenders, but he does, and the quill pen, it's perfect thematically. Very cool. The ink effect is an accurate representation of me whenever I use this ego. I regret saying that, but I'm keeping it in anyways. The effects are great too. Utilizing the 2 same turn attack power down makes me feel way smarter than I actually am. It's probably intentional synergy with his base ID, which is not good, but he does go very fast, so you can take the most advantage out of this effect. I used to think the haste was irrelevant, but now that Pigatria gives PM an excuse to increase the speed on enemies, it's genuinely appreciated. What isn't appreciated, however, is this passive. I do not want 3 bind whenever I get poked, please. Tragically enough, this inflicted 5 bind before the big ego overhaul. Absurd, fucked up, I have no words except for those 3. B tier, would be A if not for that passive. Not ideal, but not unideal. If you paid attention to my not so subtle cues or played the game on launch, you know that Representation Emitter has a layered history. But right now, in its current form, good. It costs 6 resources, but that makes sense considering the additional attack weight. The floor is nice, the coin power not so much. Not at all flashy, but Representation Emitter checks all the boxes. The design is uninspired though. I know I just praised Yi-Sane's suspenders, but she just took off her uniform jacket and threw a sheet over her shoulder. I don't even know what the weapon is. Is that a coat hanger? I think it might be. The close-up and the math particles being flown about in the animation is pretty cool though. Unfortunately, I can't circle the ennui in the room forever. Old Representation Emitter. The new one costs 20 sanity. As mentioned, all base ego used to cost 0. A free 40 SP across your team, accompanied by a 19 floor, is quite the tool. Sanity healing, as anyone who's played this game should be able to attest, is alright. And finally, indeed, Old Ennui is nuts. Attack skills final power +2. If 10 turns into the battle, gain 2 protection every turn, but lower attack skill final power by 2. For all my hyping, this isn't the strongest ego passive in the game. That's still Bound Wrath. And we won't make this coup roll a 19, but still, for an ego that everyone has, that costs 0 sanity, that also heals up to 40 sanity, that's also AoE, a nigh unconditional, especially at the time when chain battles didn't even exist, +2 to final power is incredible. So good that some people thought that they made LCB Foss bad on purpose just to bounce around this effect. Old Representation Emitter, game warping. New Representation Emitter, why is this ego name 8 syllables? Fine, still plenty useful. B tier. polarizing, for sure. On one hand, this is the only base ego with any kind of healing. It has two methods of doing so, actually. An uncapped lifesteal that can reach some respectable numbers, and the passive that heals you per hit on exsanguinating targets. But on the other hand, this rolls a 12 on tails. Damn. Way too many times will you send this ego to beat something just barely out of your normal range, only to roll tails on 45 sanity and eat shit. De Sancho is incredibly wishy-washy. You're never able to bank on this winning the clash, because there's always a chance that it just won't. C tier, if I had to say. And would you believe that the uptime variation is worse in every conceivable way? Base egos usually receive pittances for uptime 4, but De Sancho got more bleed, more base power, more coin power, and more consistency from the healing effect being on hit rather than heads hit, all of which is very much appreciated. Speaking of good uptime 4s, Forest for the Flames. If I have an accurate read of consensus, this ego wasn't anything special in ye medieval times. When uptime 4 breached containment, however, Forest for the Flames catapulted itself to being one of, if not the single best base ego in the game. For 10 sanity, 2 lust, and 2 wrath, you get a 28 roll with an 18 floor that can inflict 2 next turn fragile. WTF. Oh yeah, it also inflicts 6 burn, which is acceptable potency, but irrelevant outside of, burn, if they even run Liu Ryoshu anymore. I'd be hard-pressed to call this interesting. Don't take that as an insult, really. It's as pragmatic as they come. All edge, no frills, no gimmicks, just 2 fragile, 1 enemy. Personally, I wouldn't watch that, but everyone's entitled to their tastes. S tier. What else is there to say? Foreshadowing is a literary device where future events are hinted at before they happen. I don't need to sugarcoat this, it's already sweet as is. Chains of Others is so goddamn cool. From my limited experience, terms and conditions may apply. The only aspect of it is lacking is the animation, which feels like they accidentally sent the fadeaway to be half a second before it should have actually been, but hey, that just means the animation is very short. Of the other visual aspect, the design, he is slain, as a queen deserves to. Very, very simple, but the mono-white suit accent by the prisoner stripes motif on the tie and the draped over jacket and the chains binding the hand is just the cherry on top. Mwah! Excellent. Where Chains of Others makes itself known is in the effects. Ego can blend in amongst another. If you wanted to, you could categorize them pretty simply. I'm not saying that's bad, they're like that for a reason, but I am saying that Chains is an exception to that. Nothing functions quite like it. Crippling a target at the cost of limiting yourself in a similar fashion creates an intriguing risk-reward that forces you to think when deciding to activate it, encouraging knowledge of enemy patterns and an understanding of Merciless role in your team. Getting value out of Chains of Others makes me ascend to a higher plane of existence. In addition, Chains also creates pride, needing Sloth, Gloom, and Envy, sharing this feature of sync creation only with one other base ego that'll go unnamed. The passive is also good, even if it activates rarely. I won't turn my nose to 3 protection, especially funny in solos, if you're into that kind of thing. PM themselves also knew how goated this ego was. It's the only one to receive no changes at all with the big rework outside of the standard sanity cost. Sorry for gushing, but one more thing. I'd imagine Chains pairs excellently with Regret. I say imagine, since I don't actually have it, but Regret removes 2 negative effects before an attack. Fortuitously, Chains happens to give you 2 negative effects. Whether or not they can be removed by Regret, I can't say. Bound Wrath also boosts coin power, which is unaffected by Chains attack power down. Some decent synergy here, I think. Actually done this time. S tier. From a sample size of 2, all 6 cost base ego heal SP. While all base ego that heal sanity are blue, not all blue base ego heal sanity. Where am I going with this? I don't know. I needed a transition into Land of Illusion. Land of Illusion is an intriguing case as it has a lot of unique elements that somehow accumulate into a practically very uninteresting ego. The cost is the most intriguing thing about it, costing 5 Gloom and 1 Lust. Damn, Hanlu is just like me, massively depressed and only a little freaky. This can be tough to fuel while starting from scratch, but in mirror dungeons and the like, this is hardly a concern. At the end of the day, this is an ego you spam against blunt weak enemy, or just enemies as a whole if you're strapped for options. Bad? Oh, heavens no. A sanity refunding, not horribly rolling 3 attack weight ego gets the job done. Yet, being kinda boring is the greatest sin of all, other than Wrath, Lust, Sloth, Gluttony, Pride, Gloom, and Envy. This is the Occam's razor of base ego. There's nothing exceptional here, but in direct opposition to Land of Illusion, all the pieces mesh together to create a tool that's more than the sum of its parts. This prison jumpsuit has got to be my favorite of all the base ego designs, capturing both Heathcliff's guilt and resentment into one package or bag, I guess. I would be doing a disservice if I also didn't mention the 7-page Bodysack. Even with all the high points of Canto 6, still my favorite moment within it. Haste is an effect that I'm learning to appreciate, but on Heathcliff specifically, any sort of haste will always be welcome due to a particular suppressor of the deft variety. Rabbit has long since lost his title as a contender for the strongest ID in the game, but in the Mesozoic era, Bodysack into quick suppression was the shit. Bodysack has no weaknesses. That's my second JoJo reference this section. Take a drink. Really, the only time it feels bad to use is when slapping an envy or blunt resistant enemy, or both, and even then you still get some attack power for your troubles. A tier. 10 out of 10 would get shoved in this bag again. Hey, look at this gif. Pretty neat, right? So, Snagharpoon. I've honestly not too much to say on it. The 19 base power is very respectable, almost levels, but not quite. The effects are there. 3 Tremor and Bursting isn't detrimental, and 6 Bind is probably less preferred than Haste, unless you happen to be running one or both of the Red Eyes Ego. This passive, though. I've got a bone to pick with this passive. Compulsion makes you lose more when you're losing, and makes you win more when you're winning. Cool. So when I need some help, I'm kicked in the shins, and when I don't, I get a helping hand. 2 Clash power can be meaningless depending on who exactly you're running against, but simultaneously can make a doable clash impossible because you have the audacity to use your only Zane ego. What is cast? More like, what is asked? This is probably the most boring base ego, which hey, that's thematically befitting considering Rodian being Rodian, but intentionality doesn't strip a flaw of its nature. The design, while quite stylish, kind of has many of its ideas pilfered by Rhymeshake, an ego that's just a teensy bit more relevant than Walk. It rolls well, the passive is nice to have, but I hardly ever see a difference with it. The effects exist. Yeah, it's lame. She is a coin, but it's only flicked into the air. Maybe she pulled an Ultra Kill and ricocheted the axe off of it, then the ego would be peak, but she doesn't, so what is cast simply isn't. Branch of Knowledge, more like stanch of haulage. This thing is so close to being very cool. On a purely conceptual level, heads and tails representing the 2 worlds of light and dark, as well as his twink and homicidal sides, is kind of brilliant from a symbolic perspective. I like the immemorial medieval fit that in the entirely wooden axe plays into the idea of Sinclair's ableist past. Great. How did they fuck this up? Why am I asking questions with such an obvious answer? Spending 20 SP for this is not worth it in any capacity. 29 is a very good roll, in fact the highest out of any Zane ego, corrosions included. That number is the best thing you'll get from Branch though, as these effects, as is a running theme with these egos, just fine. Theoretically, the 10 SP on Tails means you won't entirely be fucked over by this effect, but considering the best part of this ego is the high max roll, and it rolls off 14 on Tails, more often than you hit with Tails, you're going to be losing a clash and exploding in horrific fashion. Plus, you're losing out on the 1 attack power-up, and the 12 rupture as well, I guess. And then, of course, this actual hellspawn of a passive, this inexorable shit stain obdurately clinging to the bowl of a toilet. A 300-ton ball and chain jeering at an ego that committed the reprehensible crime of having the audacity to almost not be unusable. Unstable. If you ever used this ego, you know the feeling. 45 SP, you use Branch and hit heads. 25 SP, this gives you a feasible chance to roll tails on a coin, which means on a 2 coin or a 3 coin skill, you run the risk of proccing this and dropping your sanity for breadcrumbs worth of damage. And this lasts the entire fight. Unstable puts you in a constant war to bring up your sanity. Don't you ever rest on your laurels, or Sinclair will be careening down a slippery slope faster than you can say, "Why didn't I shard cavernous wailing?" This whole ego got changed, by the way. It used to have no sanity-related effects and give you 2 attack power down next turn for using it, sans any tail special effects, and the 12 rupture still applying on heads. The passive used to give you attack power based on Gluttony res, and on the following turn, attack power down by that same amount. Still bad, but at the very least you can just not get Gluttony res. A little more difficult than that is not using any multi-coin skills to prevent the mental damage taken from using this ego for being directly transferred into Sinclair. For the love of the city you live in, use Wailing if you have it. In a similar vein to Forest in the Flames, they're both highly spammable, good rolling egos. Where the two differ is that Forest for the Flames inflicts 2 fragile, while 2 has... Okay. Yes, me when the Odyssey had a purpose, for all the guffaws and jests that spawned off from this one quote. Practically, this is an incredibly straightforward, incredibly good ego. Mostly because of a ludicrously high floor of 20, more than enough to beat 90% of skills without question, accompanied with a very affordable sin cost, leads to a surefire clash-winning machine that any manager will be thankful to have in their arsenal. But wait, there's more. In antithetical opposition to the last ego covered, tactical perfection is kind of nuts. Don't get hit, get extra damage up. Stacks up to 3. If you can establish a momentum, this is literally 30% extra damage. Though I admit this passive is starting to wane in relevance as direct consequence as those fucking red coins that I hate. Call now, and for 1 payment of 2 sloth and 2 pride, you too can have a cool ass trenchcoat and gunblade. Purpose of the Odyssey not included. Ledger Domain breaks away from the pattern of AoE base egos by costing the standard 10 sanity instead of 15 or 20. Combine this with the excellent effect of 4 same turn paralyze, and using this early in a turn can set you up to win several clashes if all goes well. Not to mention, it isn't a slacker on rolls either. A floor of 18 is... Sorry. We don't live in a perfect world where this is Gregor's base ego. Know that auspicious or inauspicious, depending on how you view things, title belongs to suddenly, one day. Hey, the arm design is fun. The 5 fingers vaguely corresponding to the 5 potential effects is neat, yet the mono blue outfit itself is too bland and drab for my liking. The name of the EO being continued in the quote is also inspired. Nothing else in the game does this. The closest thing is probably LCE Yi saying going on unsolicited ramblings into skill names. Picture a wheel. I'm not asking. On this wheel there are 5 slots, which, after inserting a token, gives you a range of $2 to $5, or your equivalent currency if you don't live in Freedomville. Directly to your left, there is a machine that when you insert a token, gives you $50. This is the suddenly one-day experience. Yes, 10 potency is pretty good application, if you can get the 1 in 5 chance to roll it, if you happen to have enough count to take advantage of it, if you're delirious enough to seriously try to use this for the potency. No matter what, the shiny new thing is always going to be the center of attention, but diminish the value of the old, it does not. On occasion, taking a magnifying glass to the unassuming pieces you never thought twice about can reveal some aspects that previously had gone unseen or unnoticed, and hey, you might acquire a newfound appreciation for the vintage rag you had no taste for. Alright, is that sufficiently pretentious enough for an outro? No? Well, that kinda sucks, I'm not rewriting it.